Star Citizen just received native VR support, and that is so insane that even I have to make an opinion video. Seeing these incredible vistas that you already know so well, in VR it feels unreal and feels like it should not be possible, but it runs rather decent, to be honest. So I'll start by just talking about my journey, my first steps, and towards the end talk a bit more about tech and bugs. First of all, this was mostly done by one CIG employee in his free time on weekends mostly. So if you're already typing why they are wasting backer money on this while the game does not work properly, please don't. And instead let's all thank CIG Silver specifically and the rest of the team for getting this surprise Christmas gift in our hands. Now for you watching, unfortunately capturing VR does not look too great because the image is square, lower res and lower detail, but I wanted to show real impressions here. For some sections I re-recorded it in normal view for your viewing experience, but most of it will look like this, sorry about that. Let's begin with the ease of use then. You have to connect your headset to the PC before starting Star Citizen, and if you're lucky and use a supported headset, this is on the Quest 3, that's it. One press of a button and you're in VR, and more importantly, one press and you are back in normal screen mode. So whenever something is not as easy in VR, inventory is mostly broken for example, you can just switch, do your inventory stuff and jump back into VR without waiting longer than 1 to 2 seconds. That is incredibly cool, because usually booting up VR is tedious and time consuming, and for Star Citizen specifically it means if you want you can do this first person walking stuff classically, and once you jump into your ship just grab the headset and switch, and that's already great. But while flying is the main attraction, I would recommend checking out these planets in VR too, because the more detail you have close to you, the more impressive it is, and here you can really finally see the scale of everything. In places where you have a lot of parallax, like with these lights, it feels like it was designed for VR, it's great. Now to properly test this, I started in Lorville specifically because I would need a lot of different ships to try. And by the way, all these interfaces, including the holographic ones in your mobi-glass or the inventory, even though I said the inventory itself doesn't work properly, but all these interfaces generally work and need some tweaking with the distance to you and all that, but they work great and as if designed with this in mind, which I think was the case. Still very pleasant surprise. Before heading home I saw a Constellation Phoenix and just wanted to have a quick look, and man, seeing these ships in real 3D is hard to describe really. The level of detail, the design, even though I have seen this ship before, this hits differently. Small look ahead at me talking about tech details. Some things like these plants that you can already without VR see are just 2D planes. This does not work, this looks pretty bad, and especially on Horizon with the cherry trees that is visible. But this is rare, most objects, most plants even, have proper depth to them. Generally you notice all the detail, you usually just run past. This luggage claim for example, suddenly so interesting in VR. It obviously benefits so much from the love of detail this game has. Just these train rides that were cool for the first 15 times and then became somewhat tedious, they are thrilling again. Unless you tend to get motion sickness, but I'll talk about that later. It feels like seeing everything for the first time again. Even though I have to say that everything, ships, even people, look smaller than I expected. I have that in other VR applications too, even in Blender where I can control the scale, but not in VR games that are designed for VR. Not sure what's the reason for that. Now flying obviously is one of the things VR is kinda made for, because you yourself sit static and just steer. That feels more natural than running, for example. And here in Star Citizen, all these things some people would call unnecessary, like having physical hangars in the first place. Waiting for the elevator to deliver your ship, waiting for the flight control to give you clearance, waiting for the doors to open. The immersion in VR is obviously on another level, and the moment you get out and see Lorville in the evening sun for the first time is breathtaking. Looking around naturally looks similar to eye tracking on the screen, but if you have never tried it, just turning your head and looking out the sides, looking over your shoulders, it's different. And what I also noticed and can't show here, the spatial audio feels so great. If you move your head and you really hear and feel your engine running behind you, obviously that's the same without a VR headset technically, but just this natural rotation of your head and the sound adjusting to that is incredibly immersive. Now let's do something. I wanted to check a few gameplay mechanics, and so I started with the first of these ASD missions, the current long storyline in Star Citizen. Getting there, your first flight to a planet, super immersive. Flying there and seeing it grow in the distance, super immersive. I did not capture that, but flying into a hangar, usually where you don't really know if you have space left and right, obviously that is so much easier if you just look over your shoulder and see your wing out of the window. And then inside the facilities, immersion, crazy. I had a weird visual bug here where the red lights in the back there, they don't have fog. That looks super weird, and just switching you see that it's not the case in not VR. That's one of the few examples of shaders or something like that that I've found that don't work properly. But you can also see how quickly you can switch between the two modes. That is super helpful. Now, playing the actual missions, I got into the elevator. Pulling out your gun is a bit weird in VR because you still move it with your mouse. There are no motion controls currently. So basically you have your head moving around in space, but your gun is completely static in front of you. Hard to describe, feels very unnatural, and moving this with your mouse also feels super unnatural in VR. Aiming is okay-ish, it works, but I don't see myself playing like this without motion controls at least. I still tried. I was unlucky and had the first super reactive NPCs I've ever had in these missions. They ran straight at me. I managed to take them down. Still have to say that it did not feel too great. But I also forgot to pack armor and stuff, try to loot a bit. Most of that, it's even trickier and more fiddly than it is without VR, but it mostly works. Sometimes you have to switch back and forth. And then I tried to get to the next part of the mission where there are more NPCs. First of all, notice that you play very different. I played way more carefully because the immersion, especially in these spooky halls, is just different. Managed to take those down too, but then died to a grenade, I assume. So, first person works. I don't think it's so great, but that honestly is nothing that they can fix without getting motion controls in, which are something they want to add at some point. Okay, but I wanted to try more things, and more things flying, obviously. So I took out another ship. Before I had the Gladius, now I took the Vanguard. Yeah, first impression, in 2D, the cockpits look different, obviously, but in VR, you really feel the difference. The Vanguard feels so, not claustrophobic, but you feel so protected. There's so much stuff around you, your shoulders. You feel safe and tanky in there, while the Gladius feels so incredibly open and nimble and light, because it's a light fighter. So the already great design that we had in the game for years now, VR just lifts that to another level. Now I took that Vanguard and flew to the Pyro jump gate and took my first jump gate. I started this in 2D because flying through these is a bit tricky. I did not have a joystick at this point, and I was a bit nervous to crash into the sides and mess it up. But then halfway through I thought, fuck it, I'm here to try this, and jump back into VR, and super immersive. I mean, you know the music in these wormholes, it's special. And I had a lot of collisions in the beginning. I was a bit afraid of not making it, and then jumping through, landing in Pyro. I was honestly a bit out of breath and relieved to have made it. And again, immersion on another level. Now I came here to do something, so I picked the first bounty hunting mission and tried to find my first target. Found it. At this point I had my joystick, but unfortunately I did not know the key, or I couldn't find the keybind blind to use all my weapons at the same time. That's one thing. Finding keys is a bit tricky, obviously, with a headset, but flying feels supernatural. And this moment when that enemy flies past you and you usually have to find him again, in VR your head just keeps tracking him, keeps connecting with him, and then following is so much easier and so, I'm going to say it again, immersive. So I managed to shoot him down, even though I felt that this would need a lot of practice to get used to, but very, very fun. I could see myself play a lot of Arena Commander like this. And then last thing, and the reason why I came to Pyro specifically, I went to my and everyone else's favorite planet in Star Citizen. I went to Bloom for just some flying, and yeah, jumping to a planet, crazy, flying through the clouds, incredible. and then low flying over the planet. I mean, you can see that some textures don't load in properly. That is something that you feel a lot more in VR, and that kind of hinders the experience a tiny bit. But the light falling through the clouds, it feels so amazing. Low flying over the planet feels so amazing. You have such a good feel for your speed and your control and your movement. It's special. And while that was all I really wanted to try, I did remember that there's a new system that I have not been to at all. So I went back to Stanton and tried to jump to Nix to the new Levski landing zone, because this is the only location that I have not seen in 2D. So seeing it for the first time in 3D, in VR, I hoped would be special. And I mean, there is not much I can say at this point that I have not said many times before. It's special. So, lots of positive impressions. Let's talk about tech. First of all, the game runs surprisingly good, but obviously not always. Every now and then things just start to stutter for up to a minute or something, and that in VR is very unpleasant compared to normal gameplay. If you tend to get motion sick, this will really break you. This will feel really terrible. And generally, there are usually a lot of measures in games to reduce motion sickness. So there's different movement types. You usually don't run too fast. There's a bit of a vignette on the edges of the screen to ease the effect on you. But this game has nothing of that. This is just the normal game, and you can watch it in VR, and whatever happens is really your fault. So just running around the station will be nauseating if you are not used to it. And the stutters really don't help. They can be a big problem. I'm pretty used to it. I don't mind too much. It works for me. But I generally also have to say I sometimes lifted the headset a bit and noticed that it looked a little better on the recording on the screen than in VR. So it even if it looks okayish for you here, the experience inside the headset was a little worse. And still, it's impressive that it runs at all at this level of detail. Speaking about level of detail, you will notice that the level of detail is not the same. I can't say for sure for the texture detail, but the object detail is always set to low once you go into VR. Look at these boxes, for example. If I compare that to the non-VR version, you can see how they switch. Again, impressive how quickly you can transition between the two modes, but the level of detail in VR is not the same as without. Same thing for clouds. I have not checked which setting, but they are on a very, very low setting and look very soft and not too great, honestly, but they are volumetric. The fact that they run at all is crazy. I don't think I have ever seen volumetric effects in VR before. Still, honestly, whenever I took the headset off and switched back to screen mode, while losing all the depth perception and that, my first impression was, wow, that looks so crisp, because the game is a lot softer in VR. I have to say that my headset is obviously not the best VR headset. The Quest 3 is pretty good, but also pretty cheap, and it has about 2K resolution for each eye, which is okayish, but there are better headsets which with those the game might look a lot sharper. I have not tried that. But if there is a VR game that would benefit from higher resolution headsets, it's probably this one. Then I would say that little errors here and there you will notice a lot quicker in VR. So for example, this bench, there's a hole in the side, it's just an open object. In 2D you might not even notice. In VR it jumps out, you will immediately notice things like this. And then obviously falling through a planet in VR also hits differently. But honestly, there were fewer bugs than I expected. It runs pretty well for a very first test version. Something technical that is not really a complaint, but something I noticed. Star Citizen relies really heavily on parallax occlusion mapping. If you don't know what that is, quick explanation is, if you know bump maps or normal maps, they fake depth, but it's still 2D. Some games use displacement or tessellation to really displace geometry that gets really 3D, looks a lot better, but takes a lot of resources, obviously. And parallax occlusion mapping is something in between, which moves the UV coordinates of textures to feel 3D. So If I look at this on a screen and I move my head in game, you can see that this object has depth to it. You see these little vent blades from different angles, but this still technically is a 2D surface. You don't see it, but it is. In VR, that does not work. This looks flat. And I think this technically should and could work if you had this effect applied to both eyes individually, but at the moment, both eyes get the same parallax occlusion mapping. And so it looks great if you don't move, but you will feel that this is 2D. And so this whole wall, this whole panel that looks incredibly detailed on a 2D screen suddenly looks super flat and super artificial in VR. So in some ways it looks worse in VR than it looks on a normal screen. Mostly details and sharpness, but yeah, what you get in exchange is the perception of depth. And on other examples, for example here on the Vanguard, where these hooks on the floor are actually modeled in 3D, these are 3D meshes. I can't describe it, it just feels so real and so haptic when you see it in VR. Here's another example where you can see that this gate has a depth to it and is the right perspective for your eyes, but in VR this is the same image you see on both lenses, and so it feels completely flat to you, completely flat. I hope they can get this running for both eyes, because it would obviously bring this to another level yet again. So final thoughts, this is amazing for a tech demo. I would not call it a full VR game yet. You can play a lot of it, but not all of it. I think all the first-person stuff is not too much fun, but other things like flying is great and everything slow is generally great. So I assume that, I have not tried it, but I assume that things like mining or salvaging would really feel amazing in VR. But if we just talk about the amount of features, if you just want to explore a lot, there obviously is so much content in Star Citizen by now that you can now experience again in VR. So just feature-wise, it might not be the worst decision, but it runs greater than I expected. And the ability to just put your headset on and back off and switch all the time, amazing, perfect, great. Now, should you get a headset just for this? I'm not sure, that's ultimately your decision, but I would say if you have never tried VR, try it before, because if there's any game that will get you motion sick, it might be this one, because it's obviously not optimized for VR. There are a lot of stores that let you rent a headset for a few days, and I would recommend that. Also, you need a decent PC hardware, even though I only have a 5070 Ti graphics card, which is obviously new and pretty decent, but you don't need the highest, craziest 90 GPU to even run it at all. And for choosing a headset, hard to say. I feel like a higher resolution would be helpful, but then again, you need an even higher PC, and with the object level currently locked too low, I can't say how big the difference would be. I would say the Quest 3 is a great budget option. It actually is a great headset, which is sold under value by Meta because they want to expand that market. But it is obviously not the greatest headset on the market, and if you want to play more than just this, might be a good idea to wait for the new Steam headset, even though the resolution will be pretty much the same, I think, to the Quest 3. It's not 4K at least. One of the features why I would usually wait for the Steam headset if you want to play a lot of VR is that it has very good wireless streaming, which on the Quest for me does not really work at all. So I play with a cable all the time, and that is annoying in other VR games. But if there's one game where you're not bothered by the cable, it's this one, because you sit all the time anyways, so you don't need a wireless headset to have fun with this. And if you consider buying a headset and you want to play specifically spaceflight sims, but maybe you think this might not be enough content just yet, I can really recommend Star Wars Squadrons, which technically does not look as good as this one, but as it was designed for VR in the first place, it feels even a bit better in a way, and it has a very great story that is again completely designed for VR. So I can still recommend that if you don't want to get a headset just for Star Citizen. But ultimately, that if you don't have a headset and don't want to spend that amount of money, you're not missing out as crazy as you might think right now. I said amazing, and I said breathtaking, and I said immersive so many times in this video, but I really don't want to get you into FOMO. I have played VR for quite a few years now, and it is very, very cool, but the effect this has the first time will reduce over time. You will probably not play this game every day or every week in VR. It is too stressful and too tedious. And even though I personally love seeing the scale and everything, again, every time I went back to the 2D screen, I was surprised how much sharper and more detailed the game looks on a screen still. So it's great, but you don't need it. And that's why I don't have an affiliate link in the comments to buy your own. But I do have Patreons and channel members, which I, as always, have to thank for supporting these videos. And I think that's all I got for first impressions. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for living with that not optimal video quality. And now thank you for watching and see you in the verse.